The first time Elsie Whittaker begged for anything after her mother died, she did not ask for a doll, or a ribbon, or one more story before bed. She asked her father not to send away the only woman who had made their house feel warm again. Caleb Whittaker stood on the front porch of his Montana ranch with one hand on the doorframe and the other wrapped around the handle of Maddie Bell's worn carpetbag. The sun was dropping behind the ridge, turning the pasture gold and red, and the October wind moved through the dry grass with a sound like whispering. Maddie stood at the bottom step in her brown traveling dress, her shawl pulled tight around her soft, full figure, her round face calm in the way a person looks calm when she has already swallowed all the hurt she can carry. She did not cry. She did not plead. That almost made it worse. "The road will still be light for another hour," Caleb said, though his voice came out rougher than he intended. "If you keep west, you'll reach Miller's Crossing before dark." Maddie looked down at the carpetbag in his hand. "Yes, sir. I paid you through Saturday." "You did. There's biscuits wrapped in the cloth." "I saw. And $2 extra." Maddie lifted her eyes then, and for one hard second Caleb wished she had stayed looking at the ground. There was no anger in her face. No accusation. Just a tired kind of dignity that made the boards beneath his boots feel unsteady. "You don't owe me kindness, Mr. Whittaker," she said softly. "I came to cook. I cooked. You asked me to leave. I'm leaving." Behind Caleb, the cabin sat too quiet. 3 weeks ago, quiet had been the only thing he trusted. Quiet did not ask questions. Quiet did not set another plate at the table. Quiet did not hum hymns under its breath while kneading dough. Quiet did not make a 6-year-old girl laugh with flour on her nose. Then Maddie Bell had walked into his kitchen with a sack of apples, a shy smile, and hands that knew how to make something from nearly nothing, and now the quiet felt less like peace and more like a room with all the air taken out. Caleb held out the bag. Maddie reached for it. Her fingers brushed his. He let go too quickly. The bag dropped a little before she caught it against her hip. "Good evening, Mr. Whittaker." She turned toward the wagon track. That was when the cabin door burst open behind him. Small bare feet slapped against the porch boards. Caleb turned just as Elsie came running past his leg, her pale hair loose down her back, her nightdress crooked at one shoulder, her face crumpled with a grief he had not heard since the day they lowered her mother into the ground. "Papa, don't send her away," she cried. The words struck Caleb harder than any shout could have. For months, Elsie had spoken only when she had to, sometimes not even then. She had pointed at cups, pushed away plates, hidden under the kitchen table when neighbors came by, and stared through windows as if waiting for someone who was never coming home. Now she flung herself down the steps and wrapped both arms around Maddie's skirt, pressing her cheek into the plain brown wool like it was the last safe place left in the world. Maddie froze. Her hands lifted, then stopped in the air. She looked at Caleb, asking permission without a word. That look did something to him he was not ready for. It showed him how careful she had been. How many times she must have wanted to comfort his child and held herself back because this was not her home, not her daughter, not her place to love. "Elsie," Caleb said, but his voice had no command in it. The little girl shook her head hard. "No, don't make her go. Please, Papa." Maddie slowly lowered herself until she was level with the child. She did not pull Elsie close. She only set one careful hand near the girl's shoulder, close enough to offer warmth, gentle enough to let Elsie choose. "Sweetheart," Maddie whispered, "your papa knows what's best." Elsie clutched tighter. "He don't know this." Caleb stepped down one stair. The wind moved between the three of them, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the chimney and warm bread from the kitchen behind him. Warm bread. Maddie had baked before leaving. Even after being sent away, she had made sure his child would eat supper. Caleb looked past them through the open door. On the table sat Elsie's blue bowl, scraped clean for the first time in longer than he wanted to remember. Beside it was a biscuit shaped like a crooked little star. His daughter had eaten. His daughter had run. His daughter had spoken. And the woman responsible stood at the foot of his porch, waiting to be dismissed like she had not just brought breath back into a house he thought grief had finished with. "Miss Maddie makes the house warm," Elsie said, her voice breaking. Mama's still mama. But Miss Maddie makes it not hurt so much. Caleb's throat tightened. He looked at Maddie, at the carpet bag held against her side, at the shame she tried to hide because the world had taught her a woman like her should be grateful for any doorway and ready to leave before she was asked twice. He had told himself he was protecting Elsie. He had told himself a lonely man had no business letting his daughter need someone who might not stay. But as Elsie cried into Maddie's skirt and Maddie waited for permission to comfort her, Caleb understood the truth with a force that nearly took the strength from his knees. He had not been protecting his child from losing Maddie. He had been protecting himself from wanting her to stay. 3 weeks earlier, Maddie Bell had been standing outside Harlan's Dry Goods with a flour sack under one arm and nowhere decent to take it. The morning had been cold enough to turn breath white, and the women leaving the church sewing circle had gone quiet the moment she stepped onto the boardwalk. That kind of quiet had a shape. Maddie knew it well. It had followed her through schoolrooms, church suppers, hiring counters, and every parlor where thin women looked at her soft waist and round cheeks before deciding what kind of soul she must have. She kept her chin up anyway. A woman could be poor. A woman could be large. A woman could have no husband, no family name worth speaking, and no invitation waiting on any mantle in town. But she did not have to bend her back just because others expected it. Inside the store, Mr. Harlan had looked over his spectacles and told her there was no work. He said it kindly enough, which sometimes stung worse. The boarding house kitchen was full. The school did not need help. The church ladies had already chosen someone to bake for Sunday socials. Then Caleb Whitaker came in, bringing the smell of cold air, horse leather, and distance with him. Nobody had to say who he was. Maddie had seen him twice before, always alone, always with his hat low and his eyes fixed on whatever road would get him out of town fastest. His ranch sat 8 miles north, past the creek bend and the old cottonwoods. Folks spoke of it the way they spoke of locked rooms. His wife had passed the spring before. His little girl had hardly been seen since. Mr. Harlan cleared his throat when Caleb asked if there was a woman in town willing to cook for a short spell. Not a wife, he said flatly. Not a housekeeper. Just cooking. Someone who could make meals simple and leave things as they were. Mrs. Prudence Harlan, standing by the ribbon counter, gave a small laugh and said most respectable women would not ride out to a lonely ranch with a widower, especially not with snow threatening before month's end. Her eyes slid to Maddie as if she had found the answer and the insult in the same place. Maddie felt heat rise in her face, but she stepped forward. I can cook, she said. Caleb turned, and for a moment he seemed surprised that the voice belonged to her. His gaze was not cruel exactly. It was guarded, measured. The way a man looks at a fence line after a storm, deciding what might hold and what is already broken. Have you cooked for ranch hands? He asked. I cooked for my uncle's threshing crews in Nebraska. 20 men some mornings. Biscuits, beans, salt pork, pies when we had apples, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Can you keep a kitchen clean? Cleaner than I found it. Can you take orders? Maddie looked him in the eye. If the orders are decent. Mrs. Harlan made another sound behind them, but Caleb did not look away. He named a wage lower than fair but not insulting. He said the job would last until he found someone else, or until his daughter ate regular again, whichever came first. Maddie heard the second part and understood the truth beneath the hard voice. The man was not hiring a cook because he wanted comfort. He was hiring one because a child was fading in a house full of food. I will come today, she said. Caleb's jaw tightened. You understand the rules before you pack a bag. You cook. You clean. You do not move my wife's things. You do not ask questions about my family. You leave when I say. Maddie held the flour sack tighter against her ribs. Then I will make sure the child eats before that day comes. By sundown, Caleb's wagon rolled into Whitaker Ranch with Maddie beside him, her carpetbag at her feet and the mountains turning purple beyond the pasture. The cabin looked sturdy from the outside, but inside it felt hollow, as if every room had been holding its breath too long. A little blue bowl sat untouched on the kitchen table. Cold broth had gone cloudy inside it. From the shadow beneath the stairs, Two gray eyes watched Maddie without blinking. Maddie took off her shawl, washed her hands, warmed the stove, and made chicken soup with carrots cut small enough for a child's spoon. She set the bowl down gently, not too close. The little girl stepped out, stared at it, then struck the bowl with one small hand. Soup spread across the floorboards. The bowl spun once and settled near Maddie's shoe. Caleb went still in the doorway. Maddie only reached for a cloth, knelt carefully, and began wiping the floor. "That is all right," she said softly. "First suppers in new company are hard." Maddie learned on the second morning that Elsie Whitaker did not like to be watched. If Caleb stood in the kitchen, the child vanished. If Maddie spoke too warmly, the child stiffened. If a plate was set at the table in the ordinary way, Elsie looked at it as if it had offended her. So Maddie stopped making food into a question. She stopped asking if Elsie was hungry, stopped coaxing, stopped saying one more bite the way worried grown people do when they are frightened by a child's thin wrists and silent mouth. Instead, she cooked as if the cabin itself needed feeding. She made coffee before dawn for Caleb, biscuits for the stove shelf, oatmeal with brown sugar when there was sugar to spare, and a small pan of apple butter that made the whole room smell like autumn had decided to stay. Indoors. Caleb said little. He came in from the barn with frost on his coat, ate standing half the time, and watched Maddie from the corner of his eye as though kindness might turn dangerous if left unattended. Maddie gave him no reason to speak. She kept to the kitchen, washed what she used, and did not touch the blue shawl hanging beside the back door or the sewing basket by the hearth with a needle still tucked into the cloth. Those belonged to the woman whose absence sat in every chair. Near noon, Maddie took one biscuit from the cooling rack and cut it with a knife until it looked almost like a star. It was crooked, 1 point longer than the others, but it held together. She wrapped it in a clean square of cloth and placed it on the floor outside the little room beneath the stairs where Elsie had made a nest of blankets. Then Maddie went back to kneading dough and did not look over when the door opened. The biscuit was gone by supper. The cloth remained folded on the floor, neat as a church napkin. Maddie did not smile where anyone could see. The next day, she made another biscuit star and left it with a spoonful of apple butter in a tin lid. That disappeared too. On the third morning, Caleb noticed. He stood by the stove with his coffee untouched, eyes fixed on the empty place near Elsie's door. "You feeding mice now, Miss Bell?" he asked. "If a mouse folds cloth that tidy, I reckon she deserves breakfast." Caleb looked at her then, and something nearly like amusement moved across his face before he shut it away. From behind the half-open door came the smallest sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a breath. Caleb went still. Maddie kept her hands in the flour. She knew better than to turn a fragile thing into a spectacle. By afternoon, the snow clouds had gathered low over the ridge, and the cabin darkened early. Maddie was rolling pie crust when the door under the stairs opened 2 inches. A pale eye appeared, then a strand of fair hair. "Is there more?" The voice was so soft the stove almost swallowed it. Maddie did not move too fast. "More what, sweetheart?" A pause. "Star bread." Caleb, who had just stepped in carrying a split log, stopped so suddenly the wood slipped from his arms and struck the floor with a hollow thud. Elsie disappeared halfway behind the door, but she did not close it. Maddie wiped her hands on her apron and chose the plainest tone she had. "I can make some. Stars take a little patience." Another pause. "I have some." Caleb looked as if the words had reached inside him and found a place he had boarded shut. He bent slowly, picked up the fallen log, and set it by the stove with unusual care. Maddie cut 3 small stars from the dough scraps and laid them on the pan. Elsie crept into the kitchen one step, then another, bare toes curling against the floorboards. She did not sit at the table. She crouched beside the woodbox, watching the oven with solemn attention. When the little biscuits were done, Maddie set them on a plate and placed the plate on the lowest chair, not too close, not too far. Elsie waited until Maddie turned away before taking one. She bit off a corner. Crumbs fell onto her nightdress. Her eyes lifted to Maddie's face. "Mama made circles," she said. Caleb gripped the back of a chair. Maddie's heart answered before her mouth did. "Then we will save circles for remembering her," she said gently. And stars can be for when the dark feels too big. Elsie looked down at the biscuit in her hand. Can I have one tomorrow? Maddie glanced once at Caleb, because the house was his, the child was his, and every answer lived under his roof. Caleb's jaw worked, but no sound came. At last he nodded. Maddie turned back to Elsie. Yes, sweetheart. Tomorrow. That evening, Elsie ate 2 star biscuits and half a cup of warm milk. Caleb sat across the kitchen with his coffee cooling between his hands, staring at the empty plate as if it were a miracle no preacher in Montana could have explained. By the end of the first week, the kitchen no longer sounded like a place where people only came to survive. It had begun to make small, living noises again. The soft knock of Maddie's rolling pin against the floorboard. The scrape of a chair being pulled close to the stove. The tinny clink of Elsie's spoon against a bowl she did not push away anymore. Caleb heard all of it from the barn, from the porch, from the woodpile, and each sound troubled him more than silence ever had. Silence had been simple. Silence had asked nothing of him except endurance. But this was different. This was warmth creeping under a locked door. Maddie never announced what she was doing. She did not say, "Look, your daughter is eating." She did not say, "See, the house needs me." She moved through the cabin with quiet purpose, her soft brown dress brushing the table legs, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, flour dusting her full forearms and catching in the little curls near her temples. She made stew thick enough to hold a spoon upright, cut apples into thin moons for drying, and taught Elsie how to press biscuit dough without making it tough. Elsie stood on a low crate beside her, serious as a judge, both hands white with flour. "Gentle," Maddie said. "Bread knows when it is being hurried." Elsie looked at the lump of dough. "Does it get scared?" "Sometimes I think everything does." "Even horses?" "Especially horses." "Even Papa?" Maddie's hand slowed. Caleb stood just outside the kitchen door with an armload of kindling, unseen until then. He waited for Maddie to laugh or soften the question away. She did neither. "I reckon grown men get scared too," she said. "They just call it something else." Elsie nodded like that made sense. Caleb stepped in then and set the kindling near the stove. Maddie glanced up, and for half the second their eyes met. He wanted to say he had brought extra wood because the nights were turning colder. He wanted to say the west window had been sticking, and he had fixed it so the draft would not blow across her work table. Instead he said, "Storm by Friday." Maddie wiped flour from her fingers. "Then I will bake enough bread for 3 days. No need to overdo it. Hungry folks rarely complain about extra bread." Elsie giggled. It was small, barely more than a bubble of sound, but Caleb felt it move through the room like sunlight crossing the floor. He looked at his daughter. Flour streaked her cheek. Her eyes were bright. Not healed. Not whole. But present. There. With them. Maddie tore a small piece of dough and shaped it into a lopsided horse. "This one is for courage," she told Elsie. "It looks like a mule," Caleb said before he could stop himself. Elsie turned, startled, then laughed again, louder this time. Maddie pressed her lips together, trying not to smile. "Then it is a very courageous mule." The sound of Elsie laughing filled the kitchen, bounced off the black stove, the shelves of chipped plates, the empty chair by the hearth that Caleb still had not moved. He had heard that laugh in dreams and woken with his chest hurting. Now it was real, and he had no place to put the feeling. That evening, Elsie ate half a bowl of stew, 1 small biscuit, and 3 bites of dried apple. After supper, she climbed onto the braided rug near Maddie's chair and leaned against her skirt while Maddie mended a tear in a dish towel. Caleb sat at the table pretending to read the supply ledger, though he had not turned a page in 10 minutes. Maddie did not touch Elsie's hair until the child pressed closer. Then she rested one hand lightly on her shoulder, no claim in it, only comfort. Elsie's eyes grew heavy. Her thumb curled around the edge of Maddie's apron. Caleb watched his daughter fall asleep without trembling, without clutching the faded blue shawl that had belonged to her mother. He should have felt grateful. Part of him did. Another part felt the floor giving way beneath him. After Maddie carried the empty dishes to the basin, Caleb stood and took the towel from her hands. "I can finish. I do not mind. I said I can finish." She heard the edge in his voice and stepped back. Elsie stirred on the rug but did not wake. Caleb lowered his voice. You should not let her get used to this. Maddie looked at him across the dim kitchen, firelight touching one side of her face. Used to what? You. Sitting there. Being here every time she reaches. Maddie folded her hands at her waist. Children reach when they are drowning, Mr. Whitaker. And what happens when what they reach for leaves? For the first time, pain crossed Maddie's face before she could hide it. Then maybe someone should think carefully before making her leave. The words settled between them, quiet and heavy. Caleb looked away first. Outside, the wind moved hard against the cabin walls. Inside, Elsie slept on the rug with one hand still curled around Maddie's apron, and Caleb understood with a kind of dread that his daughter was not the only one beginning to need the woman in his kitchen. The next morning, Caleb took the east pasture fence apart with more force than the job required. The storm had not come yet, but the sky carried its warning low and gray over the hills, and every nail he pulled from the split rail sounded too loud in the cold air. He told himself he was working because the fence needed mending. He told himself a ranch did not wait on a man's feelings. He told himself many things while the truth stood inside his cabin wearing a flour-dusted apron and teaching his daughter how to count spoonfuls of sugar. By noon, he had decided what had to be done. Not because Maddie had failed. Because she had not. That was the trouble. She had done the work too well. She had found the loose boards in his house and in his child and in him, and without asking permission, she had begun setting them right. Elsie came to the table now. Elsie slept through half the night. Elsie spoke to the stove, to the biscuits, to Maddie, sometimes even to him. And every new word should have made him grateful enough to fall to his knees. Instead, it frightened him. A child who began to hope could be hurt all over again. A man who began to listen for footsteps in his kitchen could become foolish. Caleb had buried one woman he loved. He was not proud of the fear in him, but fear did not need pride to rule a man. It only needed a door left open. When he came in before supper, Maddie was standing at the work table, rolling dough with Elsie beside her on the crate. The child had tied one of Maddie's old kerchiefs around her own waist like an apron. There was flour on her nose and happiness in the set of her shoulders. Caleb stopped just inside the door. For one brief, cruel moment, the room looked like something that might have been his if life had been kinder. Maddie looked up. You are early. Need to speak with you. Elsie's hands froze in the dough. Maddie noticed at once. Sweetheart, why do you not put the little pan by the stove for me? Elsie slid down and carried the pan carefully across the room, watching them both. Caleb waited until she was near the hearth. I will take you to town after breakfast tomorrow. Maddie's fingers tightened around the rolling pin, then loosened. I thought the week was not finished until Saturday. I will pay the full week. That was not what I asked. Caleb removed his hat and set it on the table. He could not look at Elsie, so he looked at Maddie instead, which was no easier. This arrangement has gone far enough. The kitchen seemed to lose warmth by degrees. Maddie stood very still, her round face pale but composed. Have I done something improper? No, has the food not suited you? You know it has. Then say the thing plain, Mr. Whitaker. Caleb drew a breath through his nose. Outside, a gust rattled the window frame. My daughter is getting attached. Maddie nodded once slowly. Yes. Children do that when they are treated gently. Do not make it sound simple. It is not simple. But it is true. She lost her mother. I know. No, Miss Bell. You do not know what it is to stand in this house every day and see her reach for someone who can leave. Something flickered in Maddie's eyes then, not anger, something older. You think I do not know what leaving does to a child? Caleb had no answer. Maddie looked down at her hands, still dusted with flour. I did not come here to take anyone's place. I did not sit in your wife's chair. I did not touch her shawl. I did not ask your daughter to love me. Her voice stayed soft, but every word carried. I only fed her when she was hungry. I answered when she spoke. I stayed close when the dark scared her. If that was wrong, then I do not know how to be right. Elsie had come nearer without either adult noticing. The little pan hung from her hand. Miss Maddie is leaving? Caleb closed his eyes for 1 second. Tomorrow morning. The pan slipped from Elsie's fingers and landed on the rug with a dull sound. Maddie moved first, but stopped herself before reaching. Caleb saw it, that restraint, that pain folded into obedience, and it struck him harder than defiance would have. Elsie stared at him as if he had become someone she did not recognize. "No," she whispered. Caleb crouched, but she stepped back. "Elsie." "No." Maddie bent slowly to pick up the pan. Her hands were steady now in the way hands become steady when the heart is not allowed to show itself. "Your papa loves you, sweetheart." Elsie's chin trembled. "Then why is he sending away the worm?" Caleb stood because he could not bear the question from his knees. Maddie laid the pan on the table, wiped the flour from her palms, and faced him with quiet dignity. "I will be ready after breakfast." "Maddie," he said before he meant to. It was the first time he had used her given name. She heard it. He knew she did because her breath caught just once. But she only reached for her apron strings and untied them. "Good night, Mr. Whitaker." That night, the cabin did not sleep. Elsie cried behind her door until the sound faded into hiccups. Maddie sat at the kitchen table mending the torn pocket of Elsie's blue dress by lamplight, each stitch small and even. Caleb stood outside under the porch roof long after the temperature dropped near freezing, staring at the dark pasture and telling himself he had chosen the safer hurt. But through the wall, he could hear the needle moving through cloth, hear his daughter's broken breathing, smell the bread Maddie had baked for the morning she would not be there to serve it, and the safety he had chosen began to feel like the loneliest sin a man could commit. Morning came under a sky the color of pewter, with snow riding sideways across the pasture and the road to Miller's Crossing already disappearing beneath white drifts. Caleb stood at the kitchen window before dawn, one hand braced against the frame, knowing no decent man would send a woman 8 miles through weather like that, and hating how relieved the knowledge made him. Behind him, Maddie moved quietly at the stove. She had risen earlier than he had expected, and the kitchen smelled of coffee, cornmeal, and the kind of bread that made a body remember it had a heart before it remembered its troubles. Her carpet bag waited by the back door. Packed. Latched. Ready. Caleb looked at it longer than he should have. "Road is closed," he said. Maddie did not turn from the skillet. "I saw. You can stay until it clears." "Thank you." There was no triumph in her voice. No softness offered to make it easier on him. That steadiness made him feel smaller than anger would have. Elsie sat at the table with swollen eyes and both hands around a cup of warm milk. She had not spoken since waking, but she had dressed herself in the blue dress Maddie had mended the night before. The pocket lay smooth now, stitched with tiny brown thread almost invisible unless a person knew where to look. Maddie set a plate in front of her, one biscuit split open with honey spread thin. Elsie touched the repaired pocket, then looked at Maddie. "You fixed it." It needed a little help. "Like me." Maddie's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Caleb turned from the window. The question hung in the kitchen, tender and dangerous. Maddie knelt beside the chair, careful as always, giving the child room to pull away. "Not fixed, sweetheart. You were never broken. You were just hurting." Elsie's mouth trembled, but she nodded and took a small bite. Caleb watched the bite as if it were a promise and a judgment both. Later, while Elsie folded dish towels by the hearth, Maddie stepped into the pantry for flour. Caleb reached for his gloves on the side table and knocked Maddie's apron from the chair by mistake. Something slipped from the pocket and landed face down on the floor. He bent to pick it up. It was a scrap of paper, creased until the edges had gone soft. He should not have turned it over. He knew that. But his thumb had already moved. The words were written in a sharp, pretty hand. A girl that size should know better than to dream of a widower's home. No child needs a woman nobody would choose. Caleb read it once, then again, and the blood in him went quiet. Maddie came out of the pantry with the flour tin against her hip and stopped when she saw the paper in his hand. For the first time since he had known her, true fear crossed her face. Not fear of him, he realized. Fear of being pitted. She set the flour down. "That is mine." "Who wrote it?" "It does not matter." "It matters." "No, Mr. Whitaker. It is only paper." Caleb held it carefully, as if the ugliness of it might stain his fingers. Someone gave this to you. Maddie looked toward Elsie, then lowered her voice. People give women like me many things. Looks. Whispers. Advice dressed up as concern. I learned not to collect all of it. Women like you? Her smile was small and tired. Large women. Plain women. Women without fathers to speak for them or husbands to give them a name. Women folks think should be grateful for crumbs and ashamed of hunger. Caleb folded the paper once slowly. You should have told me. Why? So you could feel sorry for me? No, then so you could be angry on my behalf for one morning and send me away the next? The words landed because they were fair. Caleb had no answer ready. Before he could find one, hooves sounded outside, muffled by snow but close. Elsie lifted her head. Maddie turned toward the window. A covered buggy rolled into the yard, pulled by a gray horse and driven by a hired man with his collar turned high. Beside him sat Mrs. Prudence Harlan, wrapped in black wool, stiff as a church steeple. In the seat behind her was a young woman with pale gloves and a hat trimmed in blue ribbon, looking at the ranch as if it had already been promised to her. Caleb's jaw tightened. Maddie's face went still again, the practiced stillness of a woman preparing to be weighed and found wanting. Mrs. Harlan did not wait to be invited. She climbed down, lifted her skirt above the snow, and crossed the yard with purpose sharp enough to cut the cold. Caleb opened the door before she could knock. Wind rushed in around her. Her eyes passed over him, then Elsie, then settled on Maddie with a satisfaction Caleb disliked at once. Mr. Whitaker, she said. This has gone far enough. The town is speaking, and I have come to help you put your household back in proper order. Elsie slid off her chair and moved silently to Maddie's side. Maddie did not touch her, but she did not step away either. Caleb looked at the folded paper in his hand, then at the woman standing in his doorway as if she owned the right to name what belonged in his home. For the first time since Maddie Bell had arrived, he did not feel afraid of how much his house needed her. He felt ashamed that he had ever let anyone think she could be driven from it. Mrs. Harlan brought the town with her even before Sunday bells had a chance to ring. She stood in Caleb's kitchen with snow melting on the hem of her black dress, her gloved hands folded over the silver clasp of her reticule, and spoke as if every board in the cabin belonged to her judgment. You are a respected man, Mr. Whitaker, she said. A lonely one, yes, and grief can make even sensible men careless. But there is still time to correct what people are beginning to misunderstand. The young woman in the blue-trimmed hat stood behind her, pretty and pale and silent, looking at Maddie with more curiosity than cruelty. Maddie kept her hands folded at her apron, her shoulders square, her full figure still as stone. Elsie had moved close enough that her sleeve brushed Maddie's skirt, but Maddie did not reach down. Not yet. Caleb noticed. He noticed everything now. What people misunderstand my household is not their business, he said. Mrs. Harlan gave him the patient smile of someone correcting a child. Every household in a decent community concerns the community, especially one with a motherless girl inside it. Elsie flinched at the word motherless. Maddie's fingers moved once, a tiny turn toward the child, then stopped. Mrs. Harlan saw it and seized the moment. That is exactly my concern. Your daughter is impressionable. She has suffered. She cannot be allowed to fasten herself to any woman who walks through your kitchen door, especially a woman whose position is temporary and whose reputation is uncertain. Caleb's eyes narrowed. Careful. I am being careful. More careful than others have been. I came privately when I might have waited for church. I brought my niece Abigail because she has agreed, generously, to help with Elsie for a proper length of time. A respectable woman. A suitable woman. The word suitable crossed the room and landed at Maddie's feet like something thrown. Elsie looked up at her. Miss Maddie is suitable. Mrs. Harlan softened her voice in a way that made it worse. Dear child, you are too young to know what that means. Elsie's chin dipped, but she did not hide. Caleb opened his mouth, then stopped when Maddie spoke first. I will not be the cause of trouble for this house. Her voice was quiet, steady, and it hurt Caleb to hear how practiced it sounded. If Mr. Whitaker wishes me gone when the road clears, I will go. Mrs. Harlan nodded, satisfied. That would be wise. Caleb turned to Maddie. I did not ask you to answer for me. Maddie met his eyes, and there was a warning there, gentle but firm. Do not fight this in your kitchen with your child watching. He understood it, and he hated that she was still protecting them while standing in the place of accusation. Mrs. Harlan used the silence to tighten her grip. Sunday service is tomorrow if the road opens. The town deserves clarity. Pastor Wells can put these whispers to rest if you simply state that Miss Bell is hired help and nothing more. Elsie's face went white. Nothing more. Abigail, the niece, looked down at her shoes. Mrs. Harlan's smile thinned. It is kinder to tell the truth before a child becomes confused. Caleb folded the cruel note tighter in his palm. Truth has not been the trouble around here. Mrs. Harlan's eyes flicked to his hand, then away too fast. Maddie saw it. Caleb saw Maddie see it. The room shifted. Not loudly. Not enough for a stranger to notice. But something had changed. Later, after Mrs. Harlan and Abigail left in their buggy, the cabin felt colder than the storm outside. Elsie sat by the stove, holding the repaired pocket of her blue dress. Maddie washed the breakfast plates though they were already clean. Caleb stood near the door with the folded note still in his hand. She wrote it, he said. Maddie did not answer. You knew. I suspected. And you were still going to stand there tomorrow and let her name you before God and everybody? Maddie set one plate on the shelf. I have been named before. Caleb stepped closer. That is not an answer. She turned then, and the firelight showed the wet brightness she had refused to let fall from her eyes. What would you have me do? Trade insult for insult? Cry in front of your daughter? Beg a town to see goodness in a body they decided was wrong before I ever opened my mouth? Her voice did not rise, but it filled the kitchen. No, Mr. Whitaker. I will walk in clean. I will stand straight. I will not give them the pleasure of seeing me crawl. Caleb had thought strength looked like holding a fence line through a blizzard or riding 8 miles with ice on your coat. Watching Maddie fold a dish towel with trembling hands and refusing to let shame bend her back, he understood he had known only half of it. Sunday morning came pale and bitter. The road opened enough for travel, and Maddie wore her plain brown dress, brushed until the seams shone, with her hair pinned smooth at the nape of her neck. Elsie came from her room wearing the blue dress. Caleb looked at her. You do not have to go. Elsie reached for Maddie's hand. This time Maddie looked at Caleb, and this time he nodded. The ride to town took almost an hour. By the time they reached the white church at Miller's Crossing, wagons already lined the road and faces had turned toward them. Maddie stepped down first. A hush moved across the yard. Mrs. Harlan stood at the church steps, waiting like judgment dressed for Sunday. Caleb offered Maddie his hand. She hesitated, then took it. The hush deepened. Inside, every pew seemed full of eyes. Maddie walked down the aisle with Elsie holding one hand and Caleb just behind her, and not once did she lower her head. When Pastor Wells rose after the opening hymn, his mouth was tight with discomfort. Before the sermon, he said, "There is a matter of household clarity Mr. Whitaker has been asked to address." Mrs. Harlan turned slightly, already pleased. Caleb stood. The whole church waited for him to separate Maddie from his name. But before he could speak, Elsie rose beside him, small and shaking, her hand still locked around Maddie's. "No," she said, clear enough for the back pew to hear. "You do not get to make Papa say she is nothing." For a moment after Elsie spoke, the church at Miller's Crossing went so still that the stovepipe ticking in the corner sounded loud as a hammer. Every face turned toward the small girl standing in the Whitaker pew, her fingers wrapped tight around Maddie Bell's hand. Maddie had gone pale. Caleb saw her bend slightly, as if to hush the child, but Elsie would not be quiet now. She had been quiet too long. "Miss Maddie did not steal Papa," Elsie said, her voice trembling but clear. "She did not try to be Mama. She never sat in Mama's chair unless I asked her to sit by me. She never told me to stop missing Mama. She just made biscuits when my stomach hurt and put stars on them because the dark felt too big." A woman in the second pew lowered her eyes. Someone near the back coughed, then fell silent again. Mrs. Harlan's mouth pinched tight. "Elsie, dear, grown matters are not for children to settle." Elsie turned toward her, and Caleb felt something inside him break open with pride and sorrow both. Then grown people should not talk mean where children can hear. A faint stir moved through the pews. Pastor Wells looked down at his Bible as if hoping the answer might be written between the pages. Maddie whispered, "Sweetheart, that is enough." But Elsie shook her head. "No, Miss Maddie. You always say bread knows when it is being hurried. I know when people are being cruel." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Caleb rose fully then. His hat was in his hands. He looked first at Elsie, then at Maddie, then at the rows of neighbors who had known his grief well enough to pity it, but not well enough to leave it alone. When he spoke, his voice was low, but it carried to the back wall. "My daughter has said more truth in 1 minute than this town has managed in 3 weeks." Mrs. Harlan stood. "Mr. Whitaker, surely you do not intend to let a child's attachment decide the dignity of your household." Caleb stepped into the aisle. "No, I intend to let my own conscience do that." He turned slightly, facing the congregation. "Maddie Bell came to my ranch to cook because I asked for help and because no one else had the courage or charity to ride 8 miles out to a house everybody knew was hurting. She did not ask for my name. She did not ask for my money. She did not ask my child for love. She earned trust the way decent people earn it, by showing up when there was work to be done and not turning away when the work was grief." Maddie's eyes filled, but she stood straight. Caleb reached into his coat pocket and took out the folded note. He held it up, not reading the ugly words aloud because he would not make Maddie carry them in public again. Somebody thought shame would send her running. Somebody thought if they named her too large, too plain, too poor, too unwanted, I would be relieved to agree. His eyes moved to Mrs. Harlan, and her face flushed under the brim of her Sunday hat. They were wrong. Mrs. Harlan lifted her chin. "This is improper." Caleb's jaw set. "No one in this church will shame the woman my daughter trusts." The silence changed. It was no longer judgment. It was a held breath. Caleb turned to Maddie. The whole room seemed to fall away until there was only her, standing with Elsie's hand in hers, looking as if she wanted to believe him, but had been disappointed by too many doorways. "And no one will call her temporary again," he said. "Not even me." Maddie's lips parted. "Mr. Whitaker." "Caleb," he said gently. "My name is Caleb." Elsie looked between them, hope bright and frightened on her face. "Papa," she whispered, "ask her right." A few people shifted. Someone near the back gave a soft, nervous laugh that died at once when Caleb did not smile. He stepped closer but left space between them, the way Maddie had always left space for Elsie. "Maddie Bell," he said, "I have been a coward in my own house. I called it protecting my daughter, but the truth is I was protecting what was left of my lonely heart. You brought warmth where I had made peace with cold. You gave my child bread when she would not eat, patience when she would not speak, and room to miss her mother without being swallowed by it." Maddie's tears slipped free now, silent and dignified. "Do not choose me because Elsie cried," she said. The church heard it. Caleb was glad they did. "Do not choose me because you are grateful. Gratitude fades when the dishes pile up and winter gets long." Caleb nodded once. "Then hear me plain. I am not choosing you because my daughter cried. I am choosing you because when she stopped crying, I finally heard my own heart again." Maddie covered her mouth with one hand. Elsie leaned against her side, smiling through tears. Caleb held out his hand, palm up, not taking, only offering. "Come home with us." Not as hired help. Not as a charity. As the woman I should have had the sense to honor before the town had to watch me learn it. Maddie looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she placed her fingers in his. The church remained silent, but it was not the silence of contempt anymore. It was the silence of people watching a lonely house find its lamp in the window. They rode home from Miller's Crossing without hurry, though the sky had cleared enough for the road to shine white under the late morning sun. Caleb drove the wagon with both hands on the reins, his shoulders still square, but the hard set of him had changed. He no longer looked like a man bracing against the world. He looked like a man learning there was someone beside him to share the weather. Maddie sat to his right with Elsie tucked between them, the child's mittened hand resting inside hers as if she feared the whole morning might vanish if she let go. No one said much for the first mile. Words had been spent in the church, and the quiet afterward was not empty. It was full of hooves, wagon wheels, melting snow dripping from pine branches, and Elsie humming under her breath for the first time since Caleb could remember. When the ranch came into view, Maddie looked at the cabin the way a person looks at a door she has been invited through, but still cannot quite believe will stay open. Caleb saw it and drew the team to a stop before the porch. "This is your home now, if you want it to be," he said. Maddie looked down at her plain gloves. "Homes are not made in one morning." "No," Caleb said. "But I reckon they can begin there." Elsie climbed down first and ran to the porch, then turned back with sudden worry. "You are coming in, are you not?" Maddie smiled, and this time she did not hide how much the question moved her. "Yes, sweetheart. I am coming in." The cabin smelled faintly of yesterday's bread and cold ashes. Caleb set more wood in the stove without being asked. Maddie took off her shawl and hung it on the peg beside the door, not over the blue shawl that had belonged to Elsie's mother, but near it. Close enough to belong, far enough to honor what had come before. Elsie watched the two pieces of cloth hanging side by side and seemed to think about it a long while. Then she nodded, as if some quiet matter in her heart had settled. That evening, Maddie made supper from what they had: potato soup, fried ham, biscuits cut in circles because Elsie asked for remembering, and 3 little stars because she said the dark was not as big anymore, but she still liked the shape. Caleb set the table. He had not done that in over a year. At first, he put out 2 plates from habit, then stopped, opened the cupboard again, and brought down a third. After a moment, he took the chipped 4th plate that had sat unused on the back shelf and carried it to the mantel. He placed it beneath the small framed photograph of his late wife, beside a sprig of dried lavender Elsie had once picked with her. He stood there with his hand resting on the mantel until Maddie came beside him, not touching, only present. "She does not have to disappear for us to live," Maddie said softly. Caleb swallowed. "I know that now." Supper was not grand. The soup needed salt. One biscuit leaned hard to the side. Elsie spilled milk and laughed before she remembered she used to be afraid of mistakes. Caleb laughed too, surprised by the sound of it. Maddie looked from father to daughter, and the ache she had carried for years loosened a little, not gone, not forgotten, but no longer seated at the head of the table. Winter passed slowly over Whitaker Ranch. Maddie stayed. Not as a guest counting days. Not as hired help waiting for dismissal. She stayed through frozen mornings and thawing afternoons, through bread that rose and bread that failed, through Elsie's questions about heaven and mothers and whether love could stretch wide enough to hold new people without letting go of old ones. Caleb learned to answer when he could and to sit quietly when he could not. In March, when the creek broke free of ice, he asked Maddie again, this time alone beside the porch steps with his hat in his hands and no town watching. She said yes before his courage had a chance to run. They married in April under a sky washed clean by rain, with Pastor Wells speaking gently, Abigail Harlan bringing a basket of sugared rolls in apology, and Elsie standing between them holding wildflowers in both hands. Mrs. Harlan did not come. No one seemed to miss her. By summer, the ranch had changed in ways a passerby could see from the road. Curtains washed and moving in open windows. A kitchen garden behind the cabin. Smoke rising every morning. A child's laughter carrying out toward the barn. Caleb still had quiet in him, but it was no longer the locked kind. Maddie still moved with the careful dignity of a woman who had known too many closed doors, but now she walked through this one without asking permission. Some evenings, after the dishes were done, Elsie would sit at the table with flour on her elbows, shaping dough into stars while Caleb brought in wood that did not yet need bringing, and Maddie pretended not to know he only wanted a reason to pass behind her chair. The photograph on the mantel stayed where it was. So did the lavender. And beside it, one spring afternoon, Elsie placed